Welcome back. My name is Jen Robom, licensed clinical psychologist and faculty for the Family Medicine Residency of Western Montana. I'm talking to you today about climate change and mental health. The learning objective for this section is to describe anticipated mental health impacts in Montana due to chronic or cumulative climate change exposures. When talking about the mental health impacts associated with climate change, most people think of extreme weather events and disasters like those we discussed in the last section. Importantly, however, climate change can also affect mental health due to exposures that are more incremental, long-lasting, or slow creeping. Examples of these sorts of chronic or cumulative exposures across the globe include rising temperatures, sea level rise, melting sea ice, diminished air quality, melting permafrost, ocean acidification, and species loss. In the coming decades in Montana, our climate modeling predicts that we'll experience rising temperatures, reduced air quality due to wildfire smoke, earlier snowmelt, less predictable or more variable precipitation, and drought. These gradual exposures will change outdoor recreation opportunities, impact farming and ranching, and slowly erode ecosystems, impacting tourism, cultural traditions, sense of place, and quality of life. These types of cumulative exposures may also trigger social changes, such as changes to cultural traditions or migration away from some rural or agricultural communities. And while these sorts of exposures may be more gradual and less dramatic than a wildfire, they'll nonetheless contribute to mental health difficulties and social disruptions in Montana. There's a great deal of research evidence linking higher ambient temperatures and a wide range of mental health outcomes, including violence, aggressive behavior, suicides, increased emergency department visits for mental illness, and self-reported days of poor mental health. Researchers have also found a strong association between drought and mental health, with drought linked to a range of mental health indicators, including lower life satisfaction, greater distress, grief and loss, and even suicide, particularly for farmers or individuals for whom drought resulted in financial stress or relocation. Finally, there's been limited research on exposure to wildfire smoke and mental health, and it has been inconclusive. Most quantitative studies have either found no association or have not studied smoke exposure independently from fire exposure. But studies of haze in Indonesia have linked exposure to sadness and mild psychological disturbances, and qualitative studies have found links between wildfire smoke exposure and feelings of frustration, isolation, stress, and depression. I know from personal experience that my own mood is powerfully impacted by the presence of wildfire smoke, particularly when it lingers for weeks at a time. I want to emphasize that certain groups will be more vulnerable to these chronic or cumulative climate change impacts in Montana because their livelihoods and sometimes their identities depend on them. Depending on how bad chronic or cumulative exposures become, individuals linked to agricultural, tourism, and tribal communities could struggle with social and economic instability, loss of social support structures, loss of a sense of control and autonomy, and displacement or dislocation. As just one example, a study of Montana farmers found that nearly 3/4 reported experiencing moderate to high levels of anxiety when thinking about climate change and its effects on agricultural business. And ecological changes could threaten food security, community health, and cultural well-being for Montana's tribal communities due to loss of physical ecosystems and landscapes, environmental knowledge, valued species, and cultural identity. Importantly, high levels of parental stress or community disruption can result in less attention and attunement to children's developmental and emotional needs. Stressors that threaten stable families and communities in Montana could therefore contribute to increases in mental and behavioral health concerns in children as well. Before concluding this section, I want to introduce a term with which you may not yet be familiar: solastalgia. This is psychological distress experienced when one recognizes that the place where one resides is threatened. Solastalgia often results in an erosion in one's sense of place or of one's sense of belonging. I've heard solastalgia referred to as feeling homesick even when you're at home. Because people have stronger emotional reactions when things they care about are threatened by climate change, it makes sense that some Montanans will also experience solastalgia due to their strong connections to and reliance upon the natural environment when responding to chronic or cumulative changes in our ecosystems. So in summary, chronic or cumulative climate change exposures in Montana, such as rising temperatures, drought, wildfire smoke, and changing ecosystems, will likely contribute to mental health challenges in adults, children, and communities. Individuals whose livelihoods and identities are threatened by these changes may be at added risk, and those Montanans with particularly strong connections to the natural environment may also struggle with solastalgia.